To say Undertale is one of the most successful indie games of the past decade would be a significant understatement. Released on September 15th, 2015, 5 years ago today, it has become nothing short of a video game phenomenon and would be considered by most to be a modern classic. It has sold more than 1 million copies, is a solid 8 out of 10 according to the creator, and a perfect 10 by pretty much everyone else, and has influenced so many fan works that they're practically uncountable at this point, all in the span of just a half decade. This game has undeniably had a massive impact on a lot of people, and I don't doubt that many would rank it as one of their personal favourites or one of the best games of all time. But even when I was younger in the height of the game's popularity, and especially now that I've properly experienced the game for myself, why has this game out of the hundreds of thousands out there touched the hearts and minds of so many who've played it? So today, I'm going to take an extensive and comprehensive look at Undertale to try and decipher what people find so brilliant about this game. But to start off, I'll be looking at a little bit of the backstory of Undertale, how it was made, the development process, the Kickstarter, leading up to the game's release. Undertale began as the brainchild of Toby Fox, who had previously worked on games like his Earthbound ROM hacks and on music for the webcomic Homestuck before making Undertale. His start in game making came mainly from his high school years, from him and his three brothers using RPG Maker 2000 to make RPGs and Earthbound ROM hacks, the most famous and influential on Undertale being Earthbound Halloween Edition. A Kickstarter project funded the 32-month development of Undertale, and as a Kickstarter crap connoisseur myself, I can say with much certainty that this was an excellent project. The reward tiers were well priced, the funding goal was a modest $5,000 despite cracking $50,000 overall, and showed a lot of footage like screenshots and trailers and stuff like that to show that the game was worth backing. Undertale was made using the Game Maker Studio engine, and the development began after the creation of the game's battle system. The game was mostly made by Toby as he wanted to avoid an over-reliance on others for game making, so most of the external help came from artists, the most prominent of these being Temi Chang, who provided most of the sprites and concept art for the game. Toby's want to make an RPG stemmed from the idea that he wanted to break away from the traditional style that he found boring to play. He wanted to develop a game with interesting characters that utilises the medium as a storytelling device instead of having the story and gameplay abstractions being completely separate. The game took a lot of inspiration from many different things, like the gameplay being inspired by the Mario and Luigi and Project Toho series, the writing took parts from a lot of other game plots, and it took a lot of its comedy from the randomness of internet humour. Lots of the game's elements were, unsurprisingly enough, inspired by Earthbound, as a lot of Toby's works are. The music also took a lot of inspiration from things Toby had done in the past, as he is a self-taught musician, so naturally he'd use what he knew best, as well as a lot of the music that he listened to personally. Toby composed the music before programming a scene to decide how the scene should go, leading to the soundtrack fitting incredibly well with the scenarios they play over. The demo was released on May 23rd, 2013 on the official Undertale website, containing only the first area with a briefer version of the plot and plenty of minor changes like all the band names being allowed, higher encounter rates, and a change in the way EXP could be earned as monsters only needed to be hit instead of being killed like in the final game. The art was also a lot less detailed than in the full game, and it has some bugs. The game also incorporates a digital manual like the ones of games of old, that has a changing last page depending on what route you took in the demo. That is the origin of the terrifying faceless Flowey image if you took Genocide, by the way. As mentioned earlier, the Kickstarter was a smashing success and allowed for the desired development time, and it began testing somewhere around August of 2015, judging by a post Toby made on the Kickstarter about the testing phase and showing off a release trailer that set the date as September 15. This deadline was met, take note early access developers, and the game was released on Mac and PC, on Steam, Humble Bundle, GOG.com and the Microsoft Store for £6.99 or $9.99. A patch was released on January 2016 that fixed some bugs and altered the blue attacks that allowed for colourblind players to better distinguish the blue attacks from all the other attacks. At E3 2017, Sony announced PS4 and PS Vita ports of Undertale, as well as a Japanese localized version and physical versions of the game released by Fangamer. In March of 2018, it was announced that the game would be coming to the Switch and was released on the eShop and cartridge later that year in September. The story begins with a prologue as soon as you boot up the game, shown through cute sepia-tone photographs. Long ago, two races ruled over Earth, humans and monsters. One day, war broke out between the two races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. They sealed the monsters underground with a magic spell. Many years later, Mount Ebert, 21X. Legend says that those who climb the mountains never return. And that's pretty much it, along with the other images that show what presumably is our blank-faced protagonist heading and falling deep into the mountain. From here, the basic plot is rather linear. The human goes through the 5 main areas of the underground to escape, and on the way encounters lots of characters and environments. These 5 areas are as follows: the ruins, Snowden, Waterfall, Hotland and New Home, each having several smaller locations inside them. The game has a system of the actions taken by the player throughout the 3 different main paths: pacifist, genocide or neutral, that change a lot of what happens throughout the game and impacts the overall story. I'll be running down a general summary of the story first before getting into the specifics of each route. In the ruins, the motherly Toriel guides the human through the tunnels, showing them how to survive in the underground and taking them to a nice quaint home. But they decide to leave upon wanting to return to the surface. So they either leave peacefully with a friendly goodbye, or cut her down with zero mercy, and leave through the giant door that leads to Snowden. There they meet the sentries Sans and Papyrus, who are on the lookout for humans, with Papyrus being dim-witted but determined to capture a human, and Sans being lazy but smarter than he lets on. The human passes by many other monsters determined to capture them, in particular the K9 unit of the Royal Guard, that consists of Lesser and Greater Dog, Dogamy and Doggeressa, and Doggo. Getting past them and into Snowden Town, Papyrus stops the human in a snowstorm and confronts them, talking about his dreams of being in the Royal Guard and then fighting them. When Papyrus is defeated, the human goes along their merry way, with either a trail of dust or snow in their wake. Following the river, the human heads into Waterfall, where they are quickly pursued by the captain of the Royal Guard, Undyne, who relentlessly chases them through watery, plant-filled caverns and over massive lakes. They again meet Monster Kid, who they saw in Snowden, who is adamant about meeting Undyne and usually helps save the human from getting caught by her. Eventually, after a scenic tour around a far view of the capital, Undyne corners the human and takes him on in a brawl. Undyne is either killed here, quite justifiably so might I add, or just chases the human into Hotland, where she promptly falls over exhausted from the heat. The human can get her a cup of water or make her stay there, but either way, Undyne is no longer a threat. A threat? Fuck! The heat burns with a volcanic intensity in Hotland, where the human finds a laboratory with their face adorned on a large computer screen. Walking further into the lab, they meet an awkward and flustered scientist named Dr. Alphys, who informs the human that they have been watching them ever since they left the ruins. Right before Metaton, one of Alphys' creations, bursts through the lab wall with an unquenchable desire to kill humans. With the help of Alphys' guidance, the human goes through several of Metaton's ordeals, such as being a contestant in a quiz and on a cooking show, as well as many puzzles involving steam vents and lasers. Eventually, the human wanders into a building where they encounter Muffet, a vicious bounty hunter who is also the owner of the Spider Bake Sale, who says she was paid to kill the human by someone with a sweet smile. Eventually she is slain or decides to spare the human if they contributed to the spider cause, which leads to Metaton's last puzzle and the MTT resort. Heading through the resort into the interior of the core, Metaton stops the human at the exit to get to the last area of the underground, and after his back switch is flipped, he reveals his ultimate robotic body, Metaton EX. The two battle live on TV, with Metaton's limbs eventually being blown off, but through the supporting calls of his fans, he finds a reason to want to stay in the underground. Alphys gives a goodbye speech to the human, telling them that a monster and human soul is required to cross the barrier, instead of just a human soul, and leaves them as they enter New Home, the capital of the underground. Going through the lift at the end of the core and going past many houses, the human enters Asgore's home, which is pretty much just a monochromatic duplicate of Toriel's house, clearly a remade version of it after Asgore and Toriel split. There are more clues to this, like crumpled up butterscotch cinnamon pie recipes in the bin. All over the house and basement there are 19 encounters with different monsters you've met throughout your journey, who all tell the story of the dreamer's son, Asriel, and how one day long ago he found a fallen human who was adopted into their family. One day though, the human fell deathly sick and eventually passed away, but their soul was absorbed by Asriel and he became a being of tremendous power. The human had one final request: to see the golden flowers of their village, so Asriel strode through the barrier and placed them onto the bed of flowers. But the occupying humans, thinking the monster had killed the child, attacked and heavily injured Asriel, but he refused to attack them, so he just took the human and wandered off back into the underground, eventually dying and turning to dust. This is the moment Asgore declared war on humanity once again, as both his children and everything the monsters had was taken away in one night, causing Toriel to leave him. Through another door deeper into New Home lies the final corridor, the Judgment Hall, where Sans is waiting to judge the player for their actions. It is here they tell them about levels, or LOVE, which stands for Level of Violence, and EXP, which stands for Execution Points. The more the human kills, the more distant they become, and the more EXP they get, the more quantifiable their murders are. And Sans tells them that they will be judged here, and that they should think about their actions and what they will do next. But even Sans says it doesn't matter all that much, and that all that's important is that you are honest with yourself. At the end of New Home lies Asgore's throne room, a beautiful garden of golden flowers with a single throne located near the back, with another throne covered in a cloth tucked away in the corner. Asgore seems pretty chill about the whole thing, greeting the human very warmly and openly, politely inviting them into the next room and saying that it's tense, like a visit to the dentist. Asgore takes the human to the barrier and they look out at it. Asgore declares that this is to be the end, asking the human if they are ready. A strange light fills the room, and the king's red trident obliterates the option of mercy, and the battle commences. Here, the human has no choice but to fight Asgore until his HP is low enough to where he collapses on the ground and admit that everything he's done, overseeing the killing of the other humans to get their souls, declaring war on humanity, has not been what he wants at all. In truth, he wants his wife and children back, but he does not mind the human taking his soul to escape. The human now has a choice: kill Asgore themselves or spare him, but no matter what you do, Flowey will always come in to destroy his soul and Asgore ends up dead. Now, Flowey can absorb the 6 human souls to achieve ultimate power, which allows him to reset the save and corrupt it to his dark heart's content, utterly breaking the save file and becoming a twisted amalgamation of many different elements that allow him to utterly obliterate the human in battle. But the other human souls still resonate within this Omega Flowey, who begin to rebel and help the human by healing them with green objects and offering their support. After they have all helped the human, they turn on Flowey and destroy him, ending the game for good. After the credits, Sans calls the human to tell them about what has happened to the underground since they left, which depends on what actions the player takes during the neutral route, and in that he hopes things are better where they are, and hangs up, ending the game and the neutral run of the story. Now, bearing in mind, this is a basic breakdown of what the story will generally be, as it is likely your first playthrough will be a neutral run of the game, and I highly suggest doing it that way as well, because you can't do pacifist first time, and you just never want to do genocide first time. Kind of ruins the whole experience for everyone. But the game has 3 particular main routes that you can take to have certain impacts on the story, in particular the ending. Aside from the neutral ending I've covered, there's the true pacifist route, which involves not killing any monsters, thus gaining no XP or LV, as well as hanging out with Pyrrhus, Undyne and Alphys, and the genocide route, which requires pretty much killing every single monster in the game. Everything pretty much happens the same as it does in a neutral run, except in the genocide run there are a lot fewer NPCs because the remaining monsters are being evacuated by Alphys, but the main story beats remain virtually the same. The endings of the pacifist and genocide routes are where most changes occur. I'll do the pacifist first since it's technically the true ending of the game. So if you don't kill any enemies, bosses or mini-bosses, and go on the 3 dates... Wait, I should probably explain those. To start, after spraying Papyrus at the end of Snowdon, he will invite you to come hang out. You can find him outside his house where he invites you inside and up to his room for a date as such. He concludes he doesn't like the human the way he thinks they like him, but gives them his phone number regardless. Switching over to later in the game, after Undyne chases the human into Hotland, she collapses due to the heat conveniently next to a water cooler, so you can go over there and grab a cup to dump on her head to make sure she'll be alright, you know, so she doesn't die of overheating. But I'm sure she'd be fine anyway. Alphys probably picks her up. After she walks away, you can backtrack to her house in Waterfall where Papyrus will be waiting outside. He takes the human inside to meet Undyne, where he promptly jumps out the window, so Undyne and the human can begin some kind of manic cooking lesson that completely burns Undyne's house down. Since she still hates humans kind of, and all that, she challenges the human to a fight, but they can only bring themselves to do a single point of damage to Undyne at their strongest, proving to Undyne that the human isn't the monster she thinks they are, and they both leave the house together as friends. Undyne goes to hang with Papyrus at his house, because you know her house doesn't exist anymore. So whenever you call Papyrus, you'll be able to get some input from Undyne as well. After the Metatron EX fight, you can go back to Snowdin to find Papyrus and Undyne outside their house, where she gives you a letter to give to Alphys. Upon going to the entrance of her lab, she is given the letter and mistakes it as being written by the human, so she gets all flustered and says she doesn't deserve being forgiven for everything she put him through, but she decides to go on a date with the human as it's the least she can do for everything she did whilst guiding them. So the first part of the date is sort of an on and off affair. Like, she has loads of gifts with her in preparation for a date that is clearly for Undyne, and she manages to stop and start the date somehow, but she decides that they should go somewhere, so she takes the human to the dump. It doesn't take long for Undyne to show up, clearly expecting Alphys as the two first met here. Alphys pretty shyly admits that she thought it would be fun to go on a pretend date with the human, but it's actually Undyne she wants to date, but she's nervous about telling her the truth about who she really is, as she's lied quite a lot to Undyne and doesn't want to hurt her. Also, she thinks she's like really cool and stuff. So they decide to roleplay the scenario of Alphys telling Undyne, but Undyne quickly overhears and asks what she's doing. Alphys very quickly loses her cool and cracks, admitting her lies and saying that she thinks Undyne is neat, to which Undyne dunks her into a trash can because she's a fucking mental lad, and says that she thinks Alphys is neat too. Papyrus then shows up to train Alphys. Undyne tells the human thanks and that she thinks things will start getting better for Alphys, and upon leaving the dump, Papyrus calls saying that the human should go to her lab. At Alphys' lab, the human finds a note that she is going to confront a problem that is hers to face alone, but if the human wants to know the truth, they can enter the lift to the north of the door. Going down in the lift, the human encounters the true lab, a dark and dingy laboratory filled with ancient notes from Alphys about her experiments with a substance called determination, which is actually how Flowey was created, as the substance was injected into a golden flower that ran away. But also roaming the halls of the true lab are the 5 hideous, abominable amalgamates, melting meshes of flesh and magical matter that are the remnants of dying monsters injected with determination that meant they fused into hideous, well, amalgamations. The human spares the amalgams and finds Alphys, who expresses deep regret over her failures as she couldn't tell the families of the affected monsters or anyone else about what she did or what happened. But she's changed her mind about that and wants to tell everyone about it and be confident in herself to change for the better. After leaving the true lab and going into the exit lift, the human gets a call from a mysterious voice they have never heard before. The elevator then appears to malfunction and ends up a new home. Vines shut the door tight, blocking any exit from the area. So everything is done. The only choice is to go see Asgore. As the king prepares to fight, Toriel rushes in to stop him the same way she stopped Flowey at the beginning of the game, saying that she knows Asgore would have to have been slain for the human to leave, but despite everything he's done, he still deserves mercy. The ending looks to be a happy one, as Sans, Papyrus, Undyne and Alphys all show up to see the human, but they are all suddenly entangled with vines as Flowey pops out of the ground and begins to zap them with electricity. He explains he manipulated Papyrus in order to bring everyone together, as well as the player by making them think that they should not kill any monsters in order to get to this conclusion, and now he will absorb all the monsters' souls and the 6 human souls to become his true form. As Flowey attempts to kill the human over and over again, all the other monsters come to New Home to show their support, which causes Flowey to absorb all the souls and become a child. Yeah, a small goat child in a striped shirt named Asriel is immensely powerful, with incredibly destructive attacks, but the human still manages to hold on. Asriel recognizes their strength, and so becomes his maximum power form, aka the God of Hyperdeath. To defeat Asriel, the human must free the lost souls of their friends by defeating a fighting task that is similar to their bosses later on, as well as acting to help spur on the monsters to go back to their real selves. At the end of the fight, there is just one last person to save: Azrael. An expansion to the opening cutscene slides are shown, revealing that the fallen human at the beginning wasn't actually the one we've been playing as. It was the human spoken about by the monsters in New Home, whose name is the one we picked at the beginning of the game. And since Kara, or Chara, is considered to be the true name, the first human who died is called Kara. Azrael, upon being faced with his past, becomes more unhinged and desperately tries to kill the human, which fails as their determination is too strong, and Azrael just reverts back to being a kid again. Azrael has finally gained back his emotions and compassion that he lacked as Flowey. As before, when he was hyper powerful, he was afraid and lonely, but now he feels the compassion of all the monsters inside him, and he is apologetic for his actions, and then releases all the monsters and human souls in order to break the barrier. Oh, and the protagonist tells Azrael that their name is Frisk, as the name they've been called is the name of Chara, as explained earlier, not actually their name. After breaking the barrier, Azrael admits that he will soon revert back into a flower without the soul's power, and says that he doesn't want anyone to see him, so he'll go on alone back into the underground, instead of going up to the surface with every other monster. Frisk and Azrael share an adorable hug. Frisk meets up with their friends who are all planning to go to the surface. They go up to the surface and look out at the sun on the horizon. Frisk can either choose to go find their human family, or stay with Toriel, and then the game ends with the credits showing the monsters' lives on the surface, as well as what happened to Frisk afterwards, with a Polaroid picture with Frisk and all her friends, if you chose to leave, and Frisk staying in Toriel's home, and Toriel delivering a butterscotch pie to Frisk while they're asleep, bringing a nice close off to the game, and a ending screen that doesn't ever end. My eye ad. Now the genocide route is a lot less happy. Every boss and encounter Frisk meets is cut down with no mercy. Dust everywhere. Due to the increased amount of red text as the run goes on, it is clear that Kara is slowly corrupting Frisk the more and more they kill. Even Sans, the last line of defense, isn't safe and is slain down after his vain attempt to use karma in order to stop Frisk. After Flowey is cut down, Kara appears before the player, offering to erase the world as the final act of genocide. No matter what you do or say to Kara, Kara does it anyways, revealing that they have all the power now, meaning that if you want the opportunity to play the game again, you have to pretty much sell your soul. Metaphorically, you don't have to sign away a contract to Toby Fox to use your copy of the game, in order to play a neutral or pacifist run again, which still has repercussions as the maniacal mind of Kara still exists within Frisk, which results in the two soulless pacifist endings if you do a true pacifist after a genocide route, which pretty much implies that the Kara-controlled Frisk kills all the monsters anyway, or even all the humans for that matter. Overall, I think the story is very good. It's not groundbreaking, but it is satisfying to see unfold, and it's worth the journey of 3 separate routes to see it in its entirety. Its themes of morality and being a good person could be said to be a little bit ham-fisted in, which, yeah, I can see to an extent, but that doesn't prevent the story from being enjoyable with a lot of memorable moments, as well as having very satisfying endings. Believe it or not, this breakdown of the story that's taken up so much of this video wasn't as in-depth as I could have gone, even though I pretty much covered everything, like all the basics, as there's a lot more backstory and unimportant side bits I have left to talk about. So how about we just put a pin in that, and we'll do a future video about the full story of Undertale, where we get to do all this again, and then look at the backstory and stuff. It's going to be great. Anyways, let's move on to some of the game's other features, like the gameplay, for example. The overall gameplay is pretty simple. It's the standard RPG affair with the 4 primary directions as well as diagonal movement to navigate around the world. But it's the battle system where the gameplay really shines. It takes elements from the Japanese subgenre of shoot-'em-up games in its combat, with different mechanics like blue attacks requiring staying still and orange attacks that require... This was a well fucked up sentence. It takes elements from the Japanese subgenre of shoot-'em-ups in its combat, with different mechanics like blue attacks requiring staying still and orange attacks that require moving to avoid damage. The soul also has a multitude of different colours called soul modes that change up how the combat works across several fights throughout the game, which I'll go through here. The most common one is red mode, which allows the player full control over the soul and is used to dodge the different projectiles enemies throw at you. This is used in most encounters and is the standard affair for like 90% of the fights across the entire game. Blue mode is used in both Sans and Papyrus's fights, although it is seen first in Papyrus's, so I'll go over that first. Papyrus uses the blue mode as his so-called blue attack, and while the soul is blue in his fight, it will gravitate towards the bottom of the box as it is in jump mode. This still happens in Sans' fight when the soul is blue, but he has a lot more control over the blue mode, as shown by how he can throw the heart to all surfaces of the box. The green mode appears during the Undyne fight, which she activates by swinging her spear over the soul and puts it in shield mode. Whilst in shield mode, the soul cannot move, but instead it moves in the 4 main directions in order to stop these arrow attacks with some kind of shield. This is probably my favourite alternate mode in the game. I really love this game mechanic. The purple mode appears during the Muffet fight and puts the soul in trap mode, where it can only be moved on and between 3 lines in order to dodge these little spider enemies and like these different pastry enemies, as well as moving up and away from Muffet's pet. The last soul mode, the yellow mode, appears during the Metaton fight and puts it in shooter mode. Whilst in shooter mode, the soul is flipped upside down and really embraces the shoot 'em up influences of the combat. The soul fires a yellow bolt that is used to destroy oncoming projectiles, like boxes with circles, mini Metatons, some weird arm-like things, and Metaton's legs for some reason, as well as blowing up these bombs that cause a horizontal and vertical explosion, like it's out of Bomberman or something. These different modes are used really well to shake up the already shaken up battle system and are never intrusive, and their inclusions aren't oversaturated throughout the game because they only appear in select boss fights. Speaking of that, I'm going to go a bit off script to talk about the Mad Mew Mew fight that's exclusive content to the Nintendo Switch that puts it on a sort of splits the soul. I don't know what the mode is specifically called, but it'll be like Switch mode or something, because Nintendo Switch splits the soul into blue and red to symbolise the Joy-Cons, and you can move it left or right, depending on where you put the left and right analog sticks. You can move them across 3 like different pins on horizontal, and then like halfway through the fight it changes it so there's 2 pins on top, so you can just move the analog sticks to wherever in order to dodge oncoming attacks. The Mad Mew Mew fight is really fun because not only does it have a lot of personality, the new Switch game mode is actually, like the Switch mode is actually really good additional content. I just thought I'd add that in because I didn't say that, but then I played the Let's Play. I did the fight for my Let's Play, and I saw that it is actually really fun. Outside the enemy's attacking system, there are also slightly different systems of the human attacking the monsters, as there are 5 different patterns across the 9 weapons, which includes a single strike based on the power of the hit, which is seen on the stick, toy knife, worn dagger and real knife, a single attack which can be increased by button mashing on the tough glove, 3 separate hits for bonus damage on the belay shoes, 2 hits on the torn notebook, and 4 hits on both the burnt pan and empty gun, except the attacks are much quicker with the gun. The battle style of Undertale not only adds another layer of personality to the game, but is also a change to the typical and usually repetitive and boring for a lot of players turn-based RPG combat found in other games of the genre, like Final Fantasy, Fire Emblem, and the Mario RPGs. In these other games, there are usually different mechanics in order to try and shake up combat while still adhering to the original turn-based formula, like the capturing in Pokemon and the added layer of strategy in Chrono Trigger, due to how Chrono Trigger changes up the battle system, but these mechanics can still get repetitive, as most encounters usually devolve into the same kind of ordeal, which is just spamming Aeon attacks to get through as quickly as possible. But because every type of monster in Undertale has a different attack style and pattern, and those attack patterns can even be combined in double and triple encounters, the battling system is incredibly brilliant and is one of the most standout elements of the game. It separates itself from other RPGs like it by almost revolutionizing the turn-based battle system, which sets an example for potential future games and how they can expand on the ideas of the past. I also think it's cool that despite the battle system being a switch up of regular RPG styles, the different soul modes as well as specific encounters like the Amalgamate Lemon Bread still change up the game's battle system by changing up like what the battle does, like in the Lemon Bread one where the box becomes a mouth. That's a really good idea! Alright, graphics now. This game's graphics are a throwback to a traditional 16-bit style of games in the 1990s, like on the SNES, and they look great during the overworld segments, the character dialogue boxes, and any other closer segments like the shops and the battles. Now, it is a legitimate criticism of the majority of indie games to say that they overuse the retro pixelated style, but Undertale uses the style really well, with both the overworld and battle character sprites being very detailed and excellent looking. The overworld sprites are more simple. They still are really good and have a lot of cool, unique and funny animations to go along with them. The battle sprites are very well detailed models that have charming idle animations and are used to convey different emotions on characters, although mainly on the bosses, as well as a lot of the visual comedy of the game. Since the battle sprites are in black and white while the overworld is in colour, there are many hidden patterns in symbols while looking at the black portions of the monsters instead of the primary white portions. Despite not being in star-spangling 3D, the game runs very smoothly at 60 FPS, and the pixelated art style can still create amazing atmospheres and scenarios. For example, the watery areas of Waterfall, through a combination of lighting, colour and music, create a calming and beautiful atmosphere with the still glowing water and the blue lights against the contrasting black floors and walls. The onlook of Asgard's castle from a distance. It's a massive expanse of black and various expanding shades of blue to represent the waters of Waterfall. The underground roof is dotted with glowing blue crystals with the figures of Frisk and Monster Kid in the foreground as they look out at the towering scene of New Home and Asgard's castle. The scene lacks music, but the atmosphere alone makes it a very memorable scene and a beautiful scene as a part of the game. The same can be said for the surface, which is an outstretching horizon with the silhouettes of all the characters and various background details like the sun, the mountain, and the skyscrapers. The detail and lighting on the scene makes it an awe-inspiring ending to the True Pacifist run, and is only added by the music that plays over it. Despite what some may think, 2D art is not invaluable when compared to 3D art, and the masterful pixel art of Undertale proves this. Bearing in mind, I don't hate 3D art, 3D games look good, just 2D games can also look good as well. And there's some things that you can't do in one that you can do in other. There's many advantageous things to doing 2D and 3D. I guess that's why a lot of indie games use it, even though it still is a legit criticism to say people overuse this shit. I can dance around the idea for a while, but the meat of it is this. Undertale's graphics are spectacularly dazzling and charming, and effectively timeless, as its pixel art style will never really go out of style. So people can look at this 2050-12 and still think that this is a good game. Still think it looks good. 2050-12, fucking will leave that in. To put it simply, this game's soundtrack is fucking amazing. It's a work of mastery in every possible way. So many of the tracks are memorable, they all help create and build upon the atmosphere set by the game in certain scenes, and in general, they add so much to the gaming experience. It likely achieves this effect at the great lengths that it does, due to the fact that the scenes are based around the music, meaning that it fits with everything going on perfectly. So the soundtrack is not only ideal background noise for the game, but the fact that the soundtrack is also pure ear candy makes the whole collection great instrumentals for outside listening. Although the music only consists of a few instruments, and a lot of the tracks are remixes and changes of others, which sometimes are simple variations like Home having both the normal and music box version, or Memory being a more calm version of his theme to show off the related statue's connection to Asriel, and fitting in with the much more still scene than during their hectic encounter with Asriel. But the similarities in songs are often used in the same scene or in a similar scenario to highlight the changes in them, like the two tracks used in the Date with Papyrus. Dating Start and Dating Fight are used to reflect in musical form the increased tension and heated atmosphere in the scene. And since the date is a comedic scene, the increased tempo and intensity in Dating Fight helps to reinforce the joke about how what is pretty much a simple date could warrant such a backing score. A similar situation occurs during Metaton's Live Report Trap, where the track Live Report plays while the player looks around the room trying to find something newsworthy. Sounds not too dissimilar to the typical news report theme, but when the curtain is taken down to reveal everything is a bomb and that Metaton intends to blow the human to ashes, the music switches to the fittingly named Death Report as the situation heats up and the stakes are raised to potential death. As well as this, each track feels unique in its own way in spite of the similar sounds, making the OST as a whole not feel or sound dull or sameish at any point. These recurring elements in the songs can also be described as leitmotifs, and give the whole soundtrack a layer of musical complexity, if that's something you aspire for in your video games. As for my favourites, I think that they are probably Core and Hopes and Dreams, because I absolutely love how they sound. For a quick list of the ones that I like in particular: Dating Start, Memory, Metal Crusher, Another Medium, Ooh-Ah So Heats, Live Report, Spider Dance, Death by Glamour, Bergentruken, I think that's how we pronounce it anyways, Asgore, Amalgam, His Theme, Save the World, pretty much everything with Asriel's leitmotif in I really like, Battle Against a True Hero, and Megalovania. Oh, and Megalovania? Well, the most famous song of Undertale has a long history in and of itself, so I'll just summarise it here briefly. Megalovania, a combination of the words Megalomania and Transylvania, likely gets its naming motif from a similar compound word in video games like Castlevania and the subgenre of Metroidvania. However, the name does kind of actually have a meaning if you take up one of the original words that make up Megalovania, as megalomania is the delusion of being vastly more important and powerful than one really is. Huh. That seems familiar, you know. It's relevant to Undertale. It was originally made for the final boss of the Earthbound Halloween hack, and was used later on for the Homestuck webcomic. The song was changed and improved upon each time, which you can clearly hear by listening to the 3 versions, links in the description by the way, and all the general bossitude, as Toby puts it, of the song was kept. It's clear that Megalovania means a lot to Toby, as it clearly has the most work put into it out of any of the game's songs, and I think this pays off. Because Megalovania sounds awesome any way you spin it. Whether it's Undertale version, sounds great in Undertale, but it also sounds really good because it's way more bit crushed and like more simple in the Earthbound Halloween hack. It's a bit less bit crushed because Homestuck isn't retro, but yeah, you get what I mean, right? It was slightly refined later on for its inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, along with the Sans costume, making it much less bit-crushed and more orchestral in order to fit better with that game. 5 other songs that were included in Undertale also originally were made for other projects, which were Fallen Down, Heartache, Nyehaha, Bone True Soul, or Bone Trowel Soul, I don't really know, and Another Medium. This game has a lot of replay value, as the 3 different paths and the 93 possible endings allow for players to experiment with different combinations of which monsters they choose to kill or spare in order to get different outcomes. The inclusion of 3 vastly different routes adds longevity to the game, as there are lots of new story pieces and both major and minor changes depending on what route you do, and several smaller changes in dialogue and events when doing a second playthrough on any given save file. The idea of other possible routes in the game is mentioned, as Flowey mentions the idea of a different, happier ending after completing a neutral run if you go back through the game and don't kill anyone, as well as hinting at more possible content to do if you do a true reset, if you do a true pacifist run and then reload the save to go see Flowey. However, the genocide run is mainly based on player curiosity alone, as there are no direct references to it or its consequences, but that's kind of the idea. With an average playthrough of a run of Undertale being about 5 to 8 hours long on average, you'll be able to see the majority of what the game has to offer in a good amount of time, with enough changes to the story, pacing and tone in order to make going through the game thrice over to see a neutral pacifist and genocide run unfold. Worth it. Completely worth it. The playtime even gets shorter as you learn how to complete some of the more basic and repeated parts of the game, allowing the player to see more content in less time. The inclusion of so many neutral endings obviously incentivizes the idea of going through that run multiple times in order to change the outcome to see what will happen in the underground when X is spared or X is slain, which allows further longevity to the game as it encourages experimentation. But doing too much of this can obviously get repetitive, as you'll be going through the exact same story beats with not a lot of variations in between, but it's really an optional thing to see like loads of the neutral routes. So you really only need to do as much as you want with them, but it's still a good addition to the game because you can see what outcomes happen depending on what you do. That's a cool idea. You know, it shows your actions actually matter, especially with all the side content and little secrets defined by doing or finding certain things. Playing the game through multiple times in order to find them all in the best way possible further solidifies Undertale's brilliant replay value. Overall, I believe Undertale is an excellent game and a great new take on the RPG style. I guess because it's 5 years old, it's not. It's a new take. It's kind of a little bit of an old one, but it's like an old, like the other takes were old, and now this is new old. Yeah, I think I would agree with Toby Fox on its rating. It's a solid 8 out of 10. Perhaps it even goes over into a 9. I don't think I would put it in my top 5 games of all time, but in terms of RPGs and indie games, it's definitely one of my favourites, and I had a lot of fun with it. I think the main word to describe this game would be personality. Undertale exudes personality in all of its aspects, its environments, its battle style, and especially in its characters. Another big feature of Undertale is its breaking of conventions, its radical music that inverts the usual scoring method of soundtracks being built around the scenes, the self-referential humour, the game knowing what it is and what kind of landscape it was released in, which shows in many of its elements, like the comedy and some of the beats throughout the story, mainly what Flowey says and Sans, mainly those two, Sans and Flowey. They know the game. And the unconventional combat system allows Undertale to stand out from other indie games and turn-based RPGs, and for its other elements to shine out with these differences. Whether or not you get some emotional value out of Undertale, whether they clear moments of emotion like the ending to the True Pacifist run, Flowey's breakdown at the end of the genocide route as he realises that he's out of his depth, all the different characteristics of the cast that you identify with, or how they relate to someone you know, it's undoubtable that Undertale has resonated with people on both a level of quality as a video game and as something that has the ability to tap into emotions. This extends to it being able to teach good morals and have a lesson, which is appropriate as the game is all about being a good person and striving to be a better person, which is seen in pretty much most of the main cast arcs, like Flowey, Alphys, and Asgore especially. The idea of Undertale being an RPG where no one has to die brings with it the theme of violence not being the solution to everything, as seen by the dual roots of violence and mercy. Now granted, these aren't anything special, as a lot of things deal with these ideas, especially the idea of becoming a better person. You could basically say that that's just like a normal character arc. But the game still manages to do them well by not directly overindulging in these ideas, turning them into mostly undertones so they're not intrusive enough to be annoying, but they're still there so that someone playing it is likely to notice it and see their impact. So, for the final thoughts, let's answer the question I set out to solve at the beginning. Why did Undertale have the impact that it had? Well, it's likely a combination of the game's personality and how good of a product it is. The game has an interesting story that is satisfying to play and satisfying to see the ends of, with plenty of replay value due to its multiple endings and the many changes between each of the routes, with many secrets to find for diligent players who want to expand the story and the world. The characters are three-dimensional and are bursting with personality, with just enough time spent with each of them that it's likely you'll get attached to them instantly. The game looks beautiful no matter what system you play it on. The game's comedy is varied and isn't tied to one style, with some of Undertale's moments being hilarious to see unfold. The combat system is unique from most other turn-based games like it, which makes the game stand out from others. But the biggest thing that has allowed Undertale to keep its popularity and impact, in my opinion at least, is how open the game's message and morals are to interpretation. This stems from my idea that there are three ways that games have longevity: post-game / post-release content, speculative value, and interpretation value. Although Undertale does have the ability to be carefully examined and be theorised upon, like the events prior to the game's events like the Human v Monster War and the other fallen humans outside of Frisk and Chara, most of the main mysteries like Gaster have pretty much had everything about them that is out discussed already, so anything else you can really speculate on is conjecture or pure guesswork. So the biggest thing that keeps the game in conversation is how it can be interpreted, which will likely be what the game means and what it can mean to people. For example, each of the characters in their arcs throughout the game could be interpreted to each teach a lesson, like this comment specifically talking about the characteristics of each character and what lesson you can get from them. Like Toriel could teach to always be protective of your friends, Sans teaches to always make people smile and laugh, etc. Or you can interpret the game's overall message or the message of the individual routes. For example, I saw an idea proposed by fellow YouTuber Undertale that the game, particularly the pacifist and genocide routes, revolve around the idea of choices. With how the pacifist run is written, with the human making friends with all the monsters and helping to solve all their problems, and it ending on a high note, it can feel a little contrived and cliche. But looking at it deeper, the good ending of the game actually ends on a bittersweet note, as Asriel is destined to turn back into Flowey and remain in the underground alone for the rest of time. And looking at the end as well, there are two main choices that are directly presented to you. Whether you hug Asriel in forgiveness at the end of his fight, and whether you choose to stay with Toriel or leave the monsters behind. It isn't mandatory to do either of these things, but staying with them or leaving shows that the player, and by extension the protagonist, has the power to choose all the way up to the end of the game. In contrast, on the genocide path the player continually chooses to kill monsters, yet has many of their choices taken away from them, like how they attack Monster Kid in Waterfall, Asgore at the end of the route, and deal the finishing blow to Sans at the end of his fight, all without any button input. Finishing the Metaton Neo fight seals the genocide route from being stopped without resetting the game, as encounters no longer occur, and in the end, Kare is the one in control. Instead of being about a naive good guy because the story requires some kind of hero, the true pacifist run is about being selfless, in order to make the lives of those around you better, as shown through how the actions of Frisk in the pacifist route contrast those of the main flaws in each of the characters. Being selfless also shows the idea of Uncle Ben's age-old phrase,
"With great power comes great responsibility."
As Frisk not only has the ability to set free all of monster kind and improve everyone's lives, but also has the power to kill them all and eradicate the entire world. The game knows how powerful the human, and by extension, the player can be if they go down the genocide path. So the game is about rejecting the temptations to be all-powerful in order to reach the result that creates a happy ending for the characters. Why do you think Frisk is so physically weak throughout the pacifist run? And the reason why the game is so brilliant and can still be speculated about today, because you can take a look at what I've just proposed and look at the game for yourself and you can get a completely different meaning out of it. It's completely genius. Overall, Undertale is an absolutely masterful game, and I would 100% recommend you buying it and playing it for yourself in order to experience it. Or if you have played it already, how about revisiting the game to see what you think of it after these 5 years or however long it's been since you've last played it. Or if you've been playing it straight every day for 5 years, there's probably another ending that you haven't seen. It probably isn't. It's been like 12,000 days. You should probably took like 1,200 days. You should probably stop. Your family miss you. Bearing in mind, Undertale isn't my favourite game of all time, nor do I think that it's the definitive objective best, but it's definitely a contender in both of those categories, and I can't say that I've quite enjoyed fully playing through a game quite like I did with Undertale. I won't lie, the game had definitely got an emotional reaction out of me, mainly a warm and fuzzy feeling at the end of the true pacifist run, and seeing everyone happy and everything perfectly aligned into place. With its spiritual successor Deltarune and its further chapters looking to explore the world of Undertale, and the fact that fanworks are still actively being made to this day, the future, like that of the monsters, only seems bright for Undertale. Just to cap off this anniversary celebration, I'm going to recommend some Undertale related videos so you can go on a big ol' Undertale spree after this. To start, I've got 3 Undertale playthroughs on my gameplay channel, with one for each route of the game. They're not finished as of recording this, the genocide route isn't even fully completed yet, but you can still look up the playlists on my gameplay channel if you're interested in them. For Undertale theories, I would recommend Underlab, because a lot of the ideas he presents are really good food for thought, and his videos are very well edited and researched. Other critical videos about Undertale are Swanky Box's videos, the 8 of which I think are the best you're seeing on screen right now, because I think they're really insightful into some of the aspects of the game, and they're really entertaining to watch. I would also suggest 3 of the YouTuber Merg's videos, 2 of which are about Undertale secrets, one about regular secrets, one about Gaster secrets, and the other one being about how Undertale remembers, because he summarises lots of the game's interesting elements, and they're all really entertaining as well. He also does a lot of Undertale playthroughs if you're into that kind of thing, mostly like the AU stuff, a lot of the fan-made stuff he does. Oh, and the 3 Underpants videos by Signor Pello, because they're probably the best Undertale fan-made content out there. And they're some of like the funniest memes ever, so definitely recommend those. I'll put a playlist in the description of all the videos I've recommended for convenience sake. Oh, and later on, about 2 AM tomorrow, if you're in GMT time, like I am, there's going to be a 5th anniversary concert over on the official Undertale YouTube channel, as well as some new merchandise being released on Fangamer. So I definitely recommend supporting those. Just to end the video, I want to sincerely say thank you all for watching this. It was long, I know, but I really appreciate if you watched all the way through. Like, that's pretty mental. But now, I'm going to stop rambling on now, because I've rambled on about Undertale for way too long. Good night to you all, and remember, don't kill, don't get killed, alright? That's the best you can strive for.